welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into some really interesting material, mostly sourced from the VCrown Tiempo y Atención Mente Cuántica YouTube channel.
Right. It covers a lot of ground-altered states, reality itself, personal growth.
Exactly. We'll touch on space and time, Joe Dispenza's ideas, this thing called quantum psychology, quantum vibration, and maybe most intriguingly, the teachings of Don Juan Matus through Carlos Castaneda.
Yeah, it's quite a mix. You've got modern quantum ideas bumping up against ancient shamanism. It's about how our view of the universe and ourselves might be way more fluid than we usually think.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And VCrown's discussions really pull you in, like the one comparing Joe Dispenza and Fritjof Capra on space and time.
Mm-hmm. Linking quantum physics and spirituality.
Yeah, suggesting that maybe space and time aren't these fixed things out there, but more like constructs of our minds. It kind of echoes what you hear in some Eastern thought, or like Anthony DeMello saying everything's always changing.
Well, it certainly challenges our everyday feeling about it, doesn't it? We live in space, time passes. That's just how it is, or seems to be.
Right.
But quantum physics, going back to Einstein even, showed space and time are tangled up together. They're not separate stages for events.
So they might even be like illusions at some deeper level.
That's one way to interpret it. And this non-linear idea of time in the quantum world is so different from our usual A to B to C thinking.
Okay, so if time isn't just this straight line, how does that connect to us?
Yeah.
Like personally. The discussion mentioned our fear of the unknown.
And how society kind of pushes us into boxes.
Yeah, and it stops us having those aha moments or makes us doubt ourselves. Cron apparently used his photography as an example, trusting his own eye instead of worrying what others think. Makes you wonder how often we ignore our own intuition.
It really does. And you see parallels in wisdom traditions, like Chuang-Tzu saying, forget time, forget opinions, just connect with the now. Or D.T. Suzuki suggesting that, spiritually speaking, past and future are right here in this present moment. No real division.
And it's often personal experiences driving these ideas, right? Like Dispenza's own healing story.
Absolutely. That experience seems to fuel his whole teaching approach. Overcoming that fear of being wrong, trusting the process.
But interestingly, the conversation also warns about rigidity, even in spirituality. Creating rules where maybe they aren't needed.
That's a really important point. It contrasts that with Dispenza saying, essentially, be yourself, don't just copy someone else. The map isn't the territory.
So holding beliefs lightly seems key, not getting stuck.
Definitely. Flexibility seems crucial. The talk even brought up addiction, framing it partly as a chemical bodily response.
That loop of thought, feeling, memory.
Exactly, and suggesting you can potentially break that cycle by consciously shifting your mind.
It also talked about unprocessed emotions, especially from childhood, and how they stick with us. Jung's idea of shared human suffering came up too.
Right, the idea that recognizing our shared humanity, acting with awareness and with love, actually has an energetic impact. It's about choice in how we respond.
So it keeps circling back to self-awareness.
Yeah.
Really watching our thoughts, our moods, those recurring patterns.
Both the negative and the positive, importantly. We tend to fixate on the flaws.
True. And it hints that maybe even core personality traits aren't set in stone, which leads us nicely into quantum psychology.
Yeah, this is where it gets quite radical. Quantum psychology basically says, look, you're not just a biological machine defined by your past or your genes.
Okay, so what are we then?
Fields of consciousness,
Yeah.
interacting with a whole universe of possibilities. You're not trapped by your history.
That's a big shift. So different fields, science, spirituality, neurobiology are kind of converging on this idea that consciousness isn't just a byproduct of the brain.
Exactly, that it might be fundamental. And the discussion pointed out that traditional psychology sometimes struggles to explain things like intuition or spontaneous healing or those moments of expanded awareness. So quantum psychology shifts the focus. Instead of just digging into the past, it's about changing your present vibrational frequency.
To influence the past as well. How does that work?
The idea is that by changing your current vibration, you change the energetic resonance of past events, altering their influence. It's about self-knowledge, recognizing yourself as this vibrational being, and redesigning from there.
Okay, picture this. I'm an energy system.
Interacting with an invisible field, yeah. And reality isn't fixed. Your consciousness is actively co-creating it. Consciousness flows, it's not stuck in your head. Your identity is like a wave you can reshape with intention.
You're an active player. Okay, so let's get into the principles laid out in the Crown material. First up, consciousness as the organizing principle.
Right. They mention Max Planck, a quantum pioneer, suggesting consciousness comes before matter. It flips the usual story.
Mind-bending. Okay, second.
Non-locality and interconnectedness. Everything subtly linked, influencing everything else no matter the distance, like an invisible web. The observer effect. In physics, observing changes the observed. Quantum psychology applies this inwardly. Your awareness shapes your reality.
Number 4.
Thought as frequency. Your thoughts aren't just abstract. They have vibrational energy. They interact with the quantum field. Negative thoughts feel different energetically than positive ones.
And where you put your attention directs that energy.
Precisely. And fifth, this idea of a quantum field of information, sometimes called the Akashic records or unified field, like a universal library of possibilities you can access, maybe through meditation or focused intention.
Okay, so how does this stack up against, say, psychoanalysis or CBT?
Well, traditional methods often analyze the past or modify behavior. Quantum psychology is more about tapping into your potential by raising your frequency to transform past, present, and future. It's about inner power, moving beyond feeling like a victim of circumstance.
And it uses concepts like the collapse of the wave function.
Yeah, reality solidifying upon observation. And quantum superposition, multiple possibilities existing at once.
Quantum entanglement, that interconnectedness again.
And quantum neuroplasticity thoughts, physically changing the brain and maybe even influencing the universe, our nervous system as a kind of quantum antenna.
Wow. Okay, so this ties into the idea of quantum vibration and breaking free from thought loops.
Exactly. It comes back to things like contemplation, silence, ways to step outside those repetitive mental tracks. But it also warns against, superficial spiritual bypassing.
Right, just slapping on positive thoughts without doing the deeper work.
Yeah, you need genuine inner change. The thinking mind is just one level, remember. There's also sensing, feeling.
So how do you escape the thought loop? The material suggests it's not a linear, logical path.
Right. Logic has limits when trying to grasp the whole picture. It also stresses acknowledging our issues, our habits, but without getting stuck just talking about them forever. You need real will. Real intention to shift.
And sometimes it takes a shock to the system, a major life event.
They call it a hit, yeah. Something that forces a perspective shift. True investigation might start when you get disillusioned with thinking as the only way to know reality.
When you realize maybe the usual methods aren't cutting it.
And you get tired of external promises and solutions that don't deliver. The discussion talks about plenitude, a state beyond just thinking or just raw emotion.
Like finding insights when the mind settles down, when you let go of fixed beliefs for a moment.
Exactly. That constant wanting something else keeps us running, obscuring what's already here.
So the aim isn't to stop thinking, but to stop being the thoughts.
Precisely. To see the thoughts, but not identify with them completely. The idea of separate individual minds might even be part of the illusion. Acting on every single thought. That's described as a kind of craziness.
And observing our own unconscious demands on others.
Yeah, how we project, how we focus on their flaws instead of looking inward.
So just watching the thinking process helps diminish its power.
It helps you understand its nature. Thinking is a tool for organizing data, but we overuse it, relying on it for our sense of self, our understanding of being.
And the discussion warns against getting lost in constant information, fear-mongering.
Right. And it brings up this concept of parasitic psychological energies.
Like what?
Affective needs, conditioned memories, guilt, fear, ambition, things that feed on our repetitive interpretations. The wisdom is in recognizing and stepping out of those entangled places.
It also pushes back against just blindly accepting doctrines, even spiritual ones.
Absolutely. Personal experience, discernment, questioning those are vital. Direct experience trumps dogma. You need that inner authority. Real change often needs a jolt, something significant.
Which brings us to another key distinction they explored. Solitude versus isolation.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Moving beyond solitude as just being lonely or cut off, it draws on Krishnamurti de Mello.
Looking at solitude as a positive space for self-connection, and how our relationship with it affects how we see things like meditation, belief, even God. It seemed critical of purely institutionalized religion.
The point seemed to be that a mind trapped in isolation might miss the real essence of spirituality or beauty. That true religious feeling, it suggests, might arise from deep solitude, from that internal connection.
It questions relying too much on external interpreters, priests, gurus.
And acknowledges we can't be entirely certain about historical figures. It brings in Jung's collective unconscious as maybe a source of shared spiritual archetypes.
But the core seems to be our fear of being truly alone, of questioning our deepest beliefs. True solitude needs sensitivity, intelligence, freeing the mind.
Exactly. It's not about separation from others, but finding a space free from external influence, from the noise of the masses. The mind tends towards separation, but solitude offers a chance to touch something bigger, incommensurable.
Beyond our usual grasp. It contrasts our desire for dependence with this potential for a conflict-free state found in solitude.
Even if our current mind struggles to imagine it. And it makes you question that constant hunt for external validation for the next experience. Maybe peace is internal.
The discussion touched on healing through energy and mind.
But with caution, right? Warning against simplistic claims or creating dependency, noting that genuine healers often avoid the spotlight.
Yeah, and it contrasted known science with these less charted areas of energy, vibration, thought, power, warning against approaching them with a rigid, self-serving mindset.
Ultimately, it's about integrating insights into daily life, not just staying in a spiritual bubble. Self-inquiry, questioning beliefs. Solitude becomes about understanding these deeper things and being self-reliant. An innocence, almost.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly for the final section. Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda.
Right. Diving into the teachings of Don Juan, a Yaqui way of knowledge. The crown material acknowledges the complexities around separating teachers from teachings.
And focuses on insights about freedom.
Exactly. Looking at those early books, Teachings, Separate Reality, Tales of Power, Journey to Ixtlan, groundbreaking stuff for bringing indigenous shamanism, different ways of knowing, and yes, the controversial use of plants to a Western audience.
Castaneda's journey from academic to apprentice.
Immersed in a non-ordinary reality. The key is Don Juan's knowledge being experiential, direct, not just intellectual.
So the big themes are shamanism, the two realities, ordinary and non-ordinary, Don Juan's teaching style, tonal and nigual, stopping the world, and death as an advisor.
Let's unpack that. Shamanism and the two realities. Ordinary reality is our consensus view, through the senses, shaped by culture. Non-ordinary reality is accessed via altered states, meditation, plants, training. Different rules apply, deeper understanding is possible, usually needs a guide.
The difference being perception and control. Limited perception, but apparent control in ordinary reality.
Versus expanded perception, but maybe less individual control in the non-ordinary. Don Juan's method was all about throwing Castaneda into experiences, challenging his logic, pushing him to perceive energy directly.
Not just intellectually understanding, but seeing. This often involved intense challenges, right? Making him question everything.
Absolutely. Could he fly? Could plants talk? Using power plants wasn't for kicks. It was to catalyze that direct perception shift.
And then there's stalking and detachment, observing without emotional entanglement.
Kind of like Krishnamurti's observer, yeah. A warrior's skill to avoid emotional traps, seeing reality as a construct.
Looking versus seeing.
Seeing the energy flow, as the discussion linked to Jacobo Grinberg, perceiving beyond duality.
That's the idea. And this requires the way of the warrior. Discipline, courage, control. Not rigid rules, but readiness for the unknown, navigating altered states respectfully, acting with impeccability.
Not taking things personally. Harmony with the cosmos. Okay, let's talk about the plants. Mescalito, humito, devil's weed, framed as allies.
Conscious entities, yes. Not just substances. Mescalito peyote as a protector, teacher. Humito, mushrooms, as a bridge, expanding consciousness. Devil's weed, datura, as powerful but dangerous, demanding control. Offering abilities, maybe, but with risks. Castaneda's vision of becoming a crow was mentioned.
Right, hinting at transformative potential, perhaps like some DMT experiences. But the emphasis is crucial. These are allies, treated with reverence in Don Juan's tradition. Sacred purpose, not recreational use. Dangers of misuse are clear.
So the warrior's way is this path of discipline, purpose, fighting inner weaknesses.
Using energy efficiently, impeccability, not taking things personally, breaking habits, and using death as an advisor.
How does that work, death as an advisor?
Living with the awareness of mortality brings focus and urgency to the present. Act as if each act is your last. It fosters impeccability, detachment, meaningful action, transforms fear.
And stopping the world.
Yeah.
Suspending the usual interpretations.
Yeah, quieting the internal dialogue, the constant labeling based on past conditioning. Our mind is an interpretation machine. Stopping the world is pausing that machine to perceive directly. It's a practice like meditation. Techniques involve interrupting thoughts, shifting focus, suspending beliefs.
It sounds like a way to access other levels of reality, break free from the prison of the known.
That's the goal. Finally, the discussion briefly touched on men of knowledge, the shamans and allies these energetic entities encountered, and the tonal and nagal.
The known and the unknown.
Basically, the tonal is our everyday structured world. The nagal is the mystery, the unknown, intuition, visions. The goal is to balance both, bridging the two for a complete understanding. As above, so below, perhaps.
Oh, okay. So, wrapping this all up, we've journeyed from quantum physics and consciousness,
Through quantum psychology, breaking thought patterns, solitude.
all the way to Don Juan's shamanic path. Lots of overlapping themes. Mind power, interconnectedness, direct experience, self-discovery.
It really highlights how limited our everyday perception might be and the potential we have to expand it, whether through inner work, altered states, or just questioning our assumptions.
So for you listening, maybe think about this. What would it mean to practice stopping the world in your own life, even briefly, to quiet that inner narrator?
And how could you play with the balance between your rational understanding, your tonal, and your intuition, your acceptance of mystery, the nagal?
Are there beliefs you hold tightly that you could just experimentally loosen your grip on? See what new perspectives emerge.
It seems embracing both logic and mystery might be key to deeper growth. It's definitely an ongoing journey.
And the most exciting discoveries often seem to lie just outside our comfortable, familiar ways of seeing things. Something to ponder.